Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sea fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Judd Falcon slammed his fist against the alarm panel. The klaxon shrieked, drowning in the chaos outside. Plasma bolts rained down like hellfire, their crimson streaks flashing against the bunker's walls. Then impact. The colony's edge erupted. Silos buckled, screamed, and fire tore through the dry, cracked earth. Explosions punched deep craters into the ground, kicking up plumes of dust and shrapnel. Falcon was already moving, boots pounding the deck, rifle tight across his chest. He burst from the bunker and hit the barricades running. He shoved a crate aside as colonists scrambled into position, some gripping battered slug throwers, others clutching makeshift spears torn from mining gear. Their hands shook, their eyes didn't. Then the sky roared. A swarm of Kyle-Vor warships dropped from orbit, their angular hulls black as pitch against the bruised violet dusk. Spat plasma in jagged arcs, carving the ground like a predator's claws. More ships descended, engines howling like feral beasts, their hatches slamming open with a hiss of hydraulics. Then they came. Tall, Cine warriors poured out, their glistening dark scales catching the dim light. Clawed hands gripped curved blades, and magma rifles spitting molten streaks across the dirt. They marched in tight ranks, boots thudding in unison. Their guttural chants rose, a deep rhythmic drone, thick with menace pulsing through the air like a war hymn from some forgotten abyss. Korth Stro at their head, his armored frame towering over the rest, 7 feet of muscle and scale, his crimson hide glinting under the plasma glow. A jagged battle standard clutched in one massive claw. The banner's surface was etched with glowing runes, pulsing faintly, almost alive. With a roar that shook the ground, he drove it into the soil, the impact cracking rock beneath. His warriors surged forward at his command, their sickly yellow eyes glowing through the slits of bone-white helmets, blades flashing as they closed the distance. Falcon's jaw tight. He yanked the communicator from his belt, shouting over the chaos as a plasma bolt scorched the air inches from his head, sizzling into the barricade with a sharp crack. How their fanatic static crackled. Then Corey Hauk's voice snapped back from the Icarus, sharp and steady despite the distortion. How so? Falcon ducked low, his shoulder slamming against the barricade as another plasma bolt blew a chunk of steel into molten slag. They're bellowing some ritual crap. Sounds like a damn cult. Howard's replay cut through, fast edged with a grim smirk. If they need chance to fight, we've got a weak spot to hit. Falcon growled, popping up to fire a burst. 3 slugs punched through a Kaler's chest, shattering scales as it crumpled mid-stride, its blade clinging into the dirt. Get here fast, we got work. He switched channels, his voice barking into the comms again. In Tobin, these bastards are here to wipe us out. Send reinforcements now. Tobin Star's voice rumbled back from the orbital station, steady but clipped with urgency. Copy, Judd. I'm scrambling what I can hold tight. Falcon spun to Milo Ventura, his grizzled sergeant, already hauling a crate of grenades to the line, sweat streaking his dust-caked face. Get Dacre on the horn. Ventura slammed the crate down, nodding as he keyed his con, his rifle snapping up to fire a burst. The shot winged a Kyle-Vor's shoulder. The alien snarled, stumbled, but kept coming. Ventura's next shot blew its head apart. The core surged forward, their chants swelling into a tidal surge that drowned out the screams of colonists caught in the open. A young man, barely 20, froze as a towering warrior vaulted the barricade, its lance slashing down. Falcon charged. He slammed his shoulder into the alien's chest. The Kyler staggered, its lance clanging off the dirt. Falcon drove his rifle butt into its skull with a crack splitting the bone-white helmet. The warrior dropped, twitching. Falcon yanked the kid back behind cover, shoving him down. Stay low and shoot. Damn it. The colonist fumbled his rifle, hands shaking, but squeezed off but burst a wild shot that caught another Kyle-Vor in the throat, dropping it mid lunge. Kath's voice boomed across the battlefield, guttural and commanding, cutting through plasma fire and gunshots like a blade. His warriors parted as he advanced. Battle standard raised high, barking orders in a tum that grated like stone against steel. Dropships touchdown behind him, disgorging more troops, dozens spilling out, their scales glinting in the flickering light of burning wrecks. Their formation tightened like a noose around the colony's edge. Falcon wiped sweat and soot from his face, peering through the haze as plasma fire hammered the barricade's steel. Splintered sparks rained down. A colonist screamed as his arm caught fire. Collapsing in a thrashing heap, Falcon snatched a spare rifle from the dirt, tossing it to a wide-eyed miner named Kellen who'd been hauling crates. Shooter, we're dead, kid. Kellen hesitated, then fired a shaky burst, winging to Kale's leg, slowing it just enough for Falcon to finish it with a slug through the chest. He hit the comms again, shouting over the den as another plasma bolt blasted a crater beside him, showering him with dirt. Where the hell are you, Hauk? Voice snapped back, tense but steady. 5 minutes. Judd, hang on. Falcon cursed under his breath, slamming a fresh clip into his rifle as Ventura lobbed another grenade. The blast ripped through a knot of core, scattering limbs and scales, but more surged forward, their chance unbroken, their yellow eyes locked on the colony's heart. A Kalor warrior vaulted the barricade, blades slashing down at a colonist. Mid-reload, Falcon fired mid-stride. The slug punched through its skull, spraying black ire onto the ground. The colonist dropped to his knees. Gasping, Falcon hauled him up by the collar. Keep moving, he turned, spotting Kath through the chaos. The warlord's crimson bulk loomed, his claw gleaming like blood under the plasma-lit sky. As he directed his troops, his warriors fanned out, encircling the reactor's outer ring. Falcon braced his rifle, shouting over the roar, we hold here, or we're dead. Ventura flank left everyone else fire at will. The trench erupted in gunfire, slugs cracking against Kyle Vor shields as the enemy pressed forward, relentless. Falcon fired 3 rounds into the charging Kyle Vor before it even hit the ground. His rifle was already pivoting to the next target, his heartbeat pounding against his skull. The trenches were barely holding plasma fire. Streak overhead, melting the edges of barricades, splintering steel into molten slag. The thick scent of burning metal and ozone filled his lungs. Ventura shouted over the chaos, voice ragged, they're pressing the flanks. We can't hold this line forever. Before Falcon could respond, a roar erupted from beyond the wreckage. A column of core warriors surged forward, their boots crunching over shattered concrete, moving in perfect unison. They carried thick plasma shields, overlapping like the scales of a beast, advancing in coordinated formations that blocked the scattered return fire from the colonists. Then came the Inferno Corps soldiers, armed with plasma lances and flame projectors, ignited the supply depot to the east. The structure buckled instantly, fire blooming into the sky, thick black smoke curling over the battlefield. Falcon's stomach twisted. If they were targeting energy sources, the reactor would be next. The screams of burning men and women cut through the comms static. The barricades flickered with the eerie glow of the flames, casting grotesque shadows of moving figures, some running, others collapsing. Falcon gritted his teeth, grabbing Ventura by the shoulder. Cover me. Without waiting for an answer, he broke into a sprint, his boots kicking up dust and debris. He barely registered the heat licking at his armor as he pushed forward. The burning structure groaned, beams twisting, glass bursting from the sheer force of the inferno. 2 figures lay at the base of the wreckage, civilians, one half buried under a collapsed section of the wall. Falcon didn't hesitate. He hooked his rifle onto his back and reached down, grabbing the first colonist, a woman, eyes wide with terror, coughing violently through the smoke. He hauled her up, nearly dragging her toward the nearest intact barricade. Plasma scorched the dirt inches from his feet, and he threw himself forward, shoving her into the trench. Stay down, he barked. He turned back just as a Kalar soldier vaulted over the wreckage, its curved blade raised. Falcon ducked as the weapon sliced through the air where his head had been moments before. He drove his boot into the alien's knee, forcing it to stagger, then slammed his rifle butt against its exposed jawbone. Cracked. The warrior reeled. Falcon fired point blank into its gut, one down, but the other civilian was still pinned. Falcon didn't stop moving. He sprinted back into the burning wreckage, dropping to one knee beside the trapped colonist, a man, his leg twisted under fallen steel. The fire was getting closer, the heat unbearable. Falcon gripped the edge of the beam, muscles straining as he tried to lift it. The metal seared his gloves, the pain sharp, but he pushed harder. Help me, the man coughed. Working on it, Falcon growled. A shadow loomed. Kyle Vor warriors advanced toward the fire, their tall Armored figures moving deliberately, their yellow eyes glowing through the thick smoke. Falcon saw the nearest one raise a rifle, taking aim. Ventura's rifle cracked the alien's head, snapped back, a spray of dark blood misting the air. Before it collapsed, Falcon gritted his teeth and lifted again. The beam shifted. He grabbed the man by the arms and yanked him free, just as the structure gave out completely, the last of it crashing into the ground flames. Swallowing the remains, Ventura and another colonist pulled them both into cover. "You're a stubborn bastard, you know that," Ventura grunted, tossing Falcon a spare clip. Falcon didn't answer. He jammed the magazine into his rifle, then turned toward the battlefield. The Corps were closing in. Cath stood in the distance, his voice booming across the field, guttural and commanding. "Advance. Take the reactor. Leave no survivors." The Corps surged forward. A sentry tower exploded, its frame twisted apart by concentrated plasma. As fire, the colonists in the trenches were forced back, their return fire struggling against the advancing wall of shields. Corps warriors moved like an unstoppable tide, pressing into the colony's core. Falcon pressed his comstra. "Where are those damn reinforcements?" "Static, then. I've got ships scrambling, but we're stretched thin. Hold the line. I'm bringing what I can." "Not good enough." Falcon snarled, snapping off shots into the advancing horde. "They're pushing straight for the reactor." He turned to Ventura, who was crouched behind the wreckage of an overturned cooler. "Ammo count running low." Ventura wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at the dwindling reserves. "We've got maybe 3 mags per rifle left." "That's it." Falcon's mind raced. They had to slow the Corps down by time. His eyes locked onto a stack of fuel reserves half buried in debris just past the barricades. It was a risk, but they were out of options. "Ventura, get the men ready. We're rigging those fuel cells. If they want to charge in like gods, we'll turn their advance into an eruption." Ventura gave him a sharp nod. "You got it." Falcon switched comms. "How if you don't get here soon, there won't be anything left." Still dodging fighters, Hauk's voice crackled through the interference. "Took some hits, but I'll be there." Falcon fired another shot. "Make it fast." He turned back to the fight. The Corps were relentless, their formation tightening, pressing forward. They moved without fear, without hesitation. The reactor loomed behind him, its structure still intact. Falcon clenched his jaw. They would not take this. Colony Howard punched the throttle, pushing the Icarus to its limits as it surged through FTL, racing toward Icarus 9. Falcon last transmission still echoed in his head. "If you don't get here soon, there won't be anything left. No time to waste." Then the alarm screamed, multiple signatures inbound. "Shu." Kim's voice snapped through the comms. "4 interceptors dead ahead." A sudden jolt rocked the ship. Plasma fire slashed through the void, tearing across the Icarus's flank. Warning lights flared red as the hull groaned under the impact. "Shields down to 20%. Kim shed hands, flying across the control panels. "We've got a breach near the starboard thrusters." "Of course we do." Hal muttered, yanking the controls hard to port. The Icarus veered sharply, rolling through a scattered field of debris, dodging another volley of plasma bolts. A second KLV fighter cut across their flank, engine screaming as it lined up another shot. Hal's eyes flicked to the damage report. "Shields failing, maneuverability compromised." They weren't going to outrun this shooter. "Divert power to rear thrusters. Hold nothing back. That'll cook the cooling system. We'll worry about that after we're not dead." Kim gritted his teeth and obeyed, rerouting power as the ship lurched forward in a desperate burst of speed. But the Corps fighters swarmed in, merciless. Another bolt slammed into the hull, sending a cascade of sparks raining across the dimly lit cockpit. That's when Howard saw it, a wrecked freighter drifting ahead, its jagged remains stretching across their path like a graveyard of twisted steel. He could use it. "Their formation's tight." Howard muttered. "I can lose them in the wreckage or get us killed." Kim shot back. "Not if I time it right." Howe threw the Icarus into a dive, plunging into the debris field at breakneck speed. The Kyle Vor fighters followed, twist in through the wreckage, plasma fire cutting dangerously close. Then came the break. Howe slammed the controls forward, redirecting power to the ventral thrusters, flipping the Icarus belly up. In a brutal deceleration, the Kyle Vor fighter on their tail shot past, caught completely off guard. "Got you." How growled. The Icarus's forward cannons blazed energy Rounds tore through the enemy's rear thrusters, sending it spiraling into the wreckage below it exploded on impact. Shrapnel scattering into the void, the remaining fighter hesitated just long enough for Howard to punch the throttle. Again, hull integrity shot. Kim warned, "We need to land before this thing falls." Apart, Howard scanned for the nearest solid ground. A barren crater-ridden moon came into view, a dead rock orbiting the gas giant adjacent to Keras 9. "That'll do," he muttered. He switched comms. "Falcon, Icarus is hit, setting down for emergency repair." Falcon's voice snapped back through the static. "Make it fast. They're closing in." Howe killed the transmission and set the Icarus on a descent trajectory. "Kim, get ready. We're making a pit stop." The ship dove toward the moon, engines sputtering. Falcon shoved another piece of scrap into position, reinforcing the barricade. As explosions rocked the outer perimeter, the Corps weren't slowing down. Their warriors pressed the western flank, shields locked, advancing without hesitation. Colonists crouched behind makeshift defenses, their hands tight on whatever weapons they had, most of them scavenged or outdated. Slug throwers, their expressions were hard, their fear buried beneath grim determination. Ventura slammed a fresh mag into his rifle, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're getting choked out here." Falcon barely spared him a glance, his mind racing through options they needed to play. His gaze flicked to the Kilor formation, tight, disciplined shields raised in overlapping cover. Plasma fire rippled out in controlled bursts, forcing the defenders back inch by inch. A direct attack was suicide. A different approach. "Ventura, get everyone with grenades ready." The sergeant's expression flickered with understanding, and he nodded. Falcon turned, shouting over the commotion, "On my mark, hit the gaps between their shields. We don't need to kill them all. Just break formation." The colonists readied their explosives. Tension thickened in the air. Falcon raised a hand. Now a dozen grenades arced through the air. The Kilor warriors reacted too late. The explosions tore through their front ranks, sending bodies sprawling. Shields shattering, smoke and dust engulfed the western flank. "Push forward," Falcon barked. The colonists surged ahead, firing into the disoriented enemy ranks. The Corps scrambled to regroup, their rigid coordination momentarily broken. Korth watched from the ridge, his crimson scales gleaming in the furlight. His mandibles clicked a sharp, calculating rhythm. These humans were not just insignificant insects, they were cunning pests. He would never underestimate them again. His gaze darkened and his voice came cold and commanding. "Deploy the demolition teams, break their spine." Kyle Vor warriors moved fast, carrying compact explosive charges toward the outer barricades. Falcon's breath hitched as he saw the first one plant a device against a support beam. Stopped them too late. The charge detonated. A shockwave blasted through the barricades, sending steel and stone flying. 2 colonists were flung backward, their bodies landing in eerie silence. Unmoving, the section of the defenses collapsed entirely, leaving the survivors exposed to the relentless Kyle Vor onslaught. The Corps pressed forward, seizing the moment. Falcon was already moving, shoving a fallen rifle into the hands of a wounded colonist. "Hold the line." Ventura grabbed his arm, voice strained. "We can't take another hit like that." Falcon's gaze snapped to the sky. Where the hell was Howard? The Icarus sat half buried in dust and rockets landing. Rough but intact. Howard and Kim worked fast. The cargo hold was stripped open. Spare components scattered across the ground. They weren't engineers, but they had learned to improvise. Kim wiped a streak of grease from his forehead. "We need a new cooling unit. The whole thing's fried." Howard scanned the wreckage of the derelict freighter nearby. "Then let's find one." The 2 men sprinted across the moon's barren surface. The freighter was a skeletal ruin, half of it collapsed inward. They climbed inside. Kim worked fast, cutting through corroded cables, hands steady despite the urgency. Howard kept watch, rifle ready. Then movement. A Kyle Vor drone skimmed over the wreckage, its sensors locking onto them. "Move!" Howe shouted. Kim ripped the cooling unit free as plasma fire erupted. They sprinted back toward the Icarus, heat blasts searing the air behind them. Howard dropped to one knee and fired. His shot struck home. The drone sparked, veered off course, and crashed in a heap of scrap. "Go!" he barked. They dove back into the ship. Kim slotted the cooling unit into place. The systems flickered, a heartbeat of silence. Then engines roared back to life. How grab the comms breath ragged Falcon Icarus is online, I'm inbound. Falcon barely heard the transmission over the chaos. The words fragmented by static, no time to respond, he just needed how to get here fast. He ejected his empty mag, slamming a fresh one into place. The core were relentless, pushing closer step by step. Then through the smoke, a familiar engine howl. Falcon looked up. The Icarus pierced the sky. Like a blade, How's voice crackled through the comms. "Sorry, I'm late, let's turn the tide." The Icarus roared overhead, its engines cutting through the thick smoke that choked the battlefield. Howard banked low, strafing the core position with rapid bursts of fire as Kim fed, targeting coordinates from the senses. Plasma rounds tore into the enemy ranks, sending warriors sprawling, but the Kylor surged forward again, shields locked, hammering against the battered human defenses. Their advance was relentless. "Jude, I'm inbound, but you need to hold a little longer." Hawk voice snapped through the comstrut, "is rallying whatever he can, but it's a patchwork fleet at best." Falcon exhaled sharply, wiping soot from his face. "Just get in the fight." Howard didn't respond, but the Icarus veered its forward cannons, blazing. The blasts ripped through the Kyle Vor lines, forcing their charge to falter. A ragged cheer erupted from the defenders. "About damn time," Ventura shouted. Falcon seized the opportunity. "We push now." He turned toward a group of colonists, pointing to the western approach. "Block that route. I want those bastards funneled right into the kill zone." The defenders moved fast, piling debris, dragging metal plating, and overturning supply vehicles, anything to force the enemy into a bottleneck. Ventura shot Falcon a grin. "I was born ready." The Kylor adjusted quickly. Korth barked orders in their guttural tongue, shifting their approach. "Too late." Falcon raised a hand, then dropped it. The makeshift explosives detonated. A thunderous explosion ripped through the battlefield, igniting the debris filled past. A Kyle Vor landing craft caught mid-descent was torn apart in the blast, its wreckage raining down like a storm of molten metal. Shrapnel carved through enemy lines, their formation buckling under the chaos hit them hard. Falcon, the colonists unleashed everything they had. Plasma bolts and bullets ripped through the staggered core ranks, turning their disciplined assault into disarray. For the first time in hours, the enemy was on the defensive. Then came the roar. Falcon turned just in time to see the Eastern Power Relay Station erupt in a fireball, throwing debris skyward. The core had deployed a portable plasma cannon, and its latest shot destroyed the colony's energy grid above. The Icarus banked hard to avoid the expanding shockwave engines howling. Then darkness. For the first time since the battle began, Falcon heard nothing. No distant gunfire, no radio chatter, just an eerie silence swallowing the colony whole. The core roared forward. Falcon ripped a flare from his belt, snapped it to life, and hurled it into the dirt. Heard a blood-red glow cut through the night, casting long shadows over the battlefield. "Light the field," he shouted. Flares burst to life in quick succession, a ghostly red haze spreading across the trenches. Their glow flickered against the Kyle Vor's reflective armor, but the enemy didn't hesitate. Their advance was relentless. Shields raised, weapons primed. Ventura's rifle flashed against the dark. "Hold the damn line." The colonists responded, gunfire erupting in bursts. But it wasn't enough. The KV had adapted, moving low, using cover. Their discipline unshaken. To Falcon's right, a barricade buckled under heavy fire. 3 colonists screamed as plasma bolts ripped through their position, their bodies dropping instantly. "Fall back to the secondary trench." Falcon bellowed. They retreated in staggered movements, covering each other as they scrambled for what little cover remained. Ventura fired another burst before throwing himself behind a supply crate, sweat streaking his dirt-covered face. "We can't hold like this," he shouted. Falcon slammed a fresh mag into his rifle, mind racing. They needed an edge fast. Then he saw it. A section of the barricade had collapsed. A colonist pinned beneath a burning support beam, screaming. Before he could fight, he had to get his people out. "Ventura, get the injured behind cover. Use whatever's left." Ventura gave a sharp nod, already hauling wounded back. Shouting orders, Falcon sprinted through the fire and chaos, dropping to his knees beside the trapped man. The heat seared his hands as he gripped the beam. Every muscle in his body burned. Hold on, he grunted with one final heave. He yanked the beam away, grabbing the wounded man and hauling him over his shoulder. Plasma fire sizzled past him, but he kept moving, dropping the man behind cover. Before diving back into the fray, Ventura turned toward him, breathing hard. That's everyone. Falcon exhaled sharply, wiping sweat and grime from his face. They had saved who they could, but survival meant nothing if they didn't stop what was coming. His comms flared to life. Dacre, do you copy? A few seconds of static, then a sharp voice came in, reading you, Judd. Situation bad. Falcon wiped more grime from his face. Worse than bad. They're pushing for the reactor, and I don't know why. A pause, then Dak's voice, low and thoughtful. Not just wiping you out. Negative. This is deliberate. We're holding for now, but if they got reinforcements inbound, I need to know before they're on top of us. Dak's voice was firm. I take it that's where I come in. You and Riggs? Falcon confirmed. There's a core outpost nearby. If they got warships en route, that's where the ORD coming from. We're already mobile. We'll find out what they're up to, Dacre said. Copy that. Stay dark, move fast. The comms cut out, leaving only the battlefield noise in Falcon's ears. The color pressed in from the south, their shields gleaming under the blood-red glow of the flares. They were close now, close enough for Falcon to see the dark reptilian features beneath their helmets, their slit pupil eyes glowing in the night. Ventura hit them hard. Focus on the shield carriers first, Falcon shouted. The colonists unleashed everything they had left. Grenades arced through the air, detonating with concussive force, knocking Kale-Vor warriors off their feet. Falcon emptied his rifle into the staggered front line, watching their formation fracture. For a moment they had an opening, then a deep rumble rolled through the battlefield. Falcon's grip tightened on his rifle. The warlord emerged from the smoke, his armor blackened, but his stance unbroken. His eyes reptilian and unblinking swept over the battlefield like a predator studying its prey. The resistance had lasted longer than expected. That irritated him. A deep reverberating growl resonated from his chest, his mandibles clicking in a slow, deliberate rhythm enough. He raised a clawed hand. Every core warrior halted instantly. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Then he clenched his fist. The core roared forward, their formation tightening, their movements brutal discipline. The battle had ceased to be a siege, it was a slaughter. Falcon pressed his CS stand. If you're coming, come now. A pause, then the sky lit up. Strath Aaron's flotilla dropped into the atmosphere, a formation of cargo haulers and drones screaming toward the battlefield. The drones flared with decoy signals, their silhouettes distorted by interference, mimicking the presence of a fully armed war fleet. It worked. The Kalor hesitated. Stark's voice was steady. Judd, you wanted an opening. Falcon grinned, gripping rifle. Then let's tear them apart. On the bridge of the Resolute, Tobin Strawn tightened his grip on the console, scanning the chaos unfolding below. His ships had dropped from FTL barely moments ago, their transition masked by the raging battle. Now there was no time to regroup, only to act. Karis 9 was on fire. The colony's defenses were crumbling under the relentless core assault, and if the humans didn't turn the tide now, there wouldn't be anything left to save. His fleet was small, barely a formation of cargo haulers, repurposed shuttles, and modified drones, but right now it was the only thing standing between survival and annihilation. All ships execute combat formation. Delta 7 Star's voice was unwavering. Drones pull their targeting systems. Cargo haulers stand by for final approach. Stan watched the battlefield unfold beneath him. The decoy drones were in position, scrambling the enemy sensors. His haulers were locked on their targets. No turning back now. Execute the maneuver, he ordered, his grip tightening on the console. Make it count down below. Falcon ducked as another plasma burst scorched past him, melting a section of the barricade behind him. That Stan, Ventura rasped. Still gripping his rifle, he actually made it above them. Stan's drone swarmed into position, emitting false sensor signatures, creating a wall of electronic interference. The Kale-Vor warships hesitated. That was all the opening Stra needed. No, he barked into his comms. The cargo haulers ignited their engines in full burn, streaking toward the core warships With terrifying velocity on the ground, Falcon saw at first the ships weren't maneuvering to engage. They were diving. One of the core warships managed to fire, ripping a cargo hauler apart mid-flight, but the other two stayed on course. Dear God, Ventura whispered. The sky itself seemed to split apart as the first hauler impacted the core destroyer. The collision erupted in a blinding shockwave, flames bursting from within as the ship's reinforced hull buckled. Under the sheer force, the explosion rolled through the upper atmosphere, sending debris raining down like falling stars on the ground. The battlefield shuddered. Kyle Vor warriors hesitated as fire reflected off their armor. Then came the second cargo hauler plowed into the side of another warship, its engines burning at maximum thrust. The impact ruptured the ship's spine, tearing it apart in a cascade of secondary explosions. Twisted wreckage tumbled toward Karis 9, a burning reminder of human defiance. The Kyle Vor faltered, their advance falling for the first time. They had never seemed vulnerable until now. The wreckage fell like meteors crashing into the battlefield below. Shrapnel cut through Kyle Vor ranks, their formations breaking for the first time. And then for a moment there was silence. The Kyle Vor hesitated for the first time. They didn't look invincible. Then the humans roared. Falcon didn't hesitate. Ventura pushed now. With renewed fury, the colonists surged forward. Ventura led the charge, gunfire cutting down the staggered Kyle Vor. As they tried to regroup, Falcon vaulted over a fallen barricade, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, every shot finding its mark. Behind him, the Icarus screamed through the sky, cannons blazing plasma fire crisscrossed the clouds as KV fighters tried to intercept. Hauk's voice crackled through the comms, keeping the skies clear. Kyle Vor dropship attempted to deploy reinforcements, but how rolled the Icarus under its belly, locking onto the exposed troop bay. Fire shouted, yelled. Missiles streaked upward, punching into the dropship's core. The explosion split it apart, mid-air, bodies and wreckage tumbling through the flames. How didn't stop. He banked hard, cutting behind a core gunship and unleashing a burst from the Icarus's plasma cannons. The enemy ship spiraled out of control before slamming into the ground in a fiery wreck. For the first time, the core were retreating, but wasn't. The core warlord stepped forward, his massive scaled frame barely illuminated by the fires burning around him. Behind him, his personal guard formed a last line of defense. The war machine rumbled forward once more, its plasma cannon charge aimed directly at the reactor. Falcon sprinted forward. Jude, wait, Ventura shouted. Falcon ignored him. The tank fired. The ground erupted in a blinding inferno, sending bodies flying. Falcon barely had time to react before he was hurled to the ground, the shockwave ripping through his bones. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but the tank was still moving. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to his feet, his grip tightening around the makeshift lance. He could barely hear Ventura shouting behind him. This had to end. With the last of his strength, he charged the tank, swiveled its cannon, recalibrating. Too slow. Falcon leaped, driving the lance into the exposed energy core beneath the turret. The reaction was instantaneous. The tank detonated in a blinding burst of fire and plasma, the explosion tearing through the battlefield. Falcon was thrown back again, landing hard. His vision flickered, and then he saw him. Cath, the warlord, stood amidst the burning wreckage, unmoved. In one hand, he held a jagged curved blade glowing with residual heat from the explosion. His yellow eyes locked onto Falcon's, and then he charged. Falcon barely had time to breathe before Korth was on him. The warlord moved like a force of nature, his blades singing through the air in precise, controlled arcs. Falcon ducked, feeling the heat of the strike pass inches from his throat. The second cut found its mark, a shallow gash along his ribs. Pain flared, but Falcon shoved it aside. He rolled, snatching a discarded combat knife from the dirt. Korth didn't pause. He was relentless. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Falcon met the next strike, head and steel clashing against alien alloy in a shower of sparks. Cath's strength was monstrous, each blow driving Falcon back. He had seconds to find an opening. Falcon knew one thing for certain: one of them wasn't leaving this battlefield alive. Falcon barely had time to brace as Cath lunged. The warlord moved with terrifying speed, his curved blade slashing through the smoke-thickened air in a deadly arc. Falcon twisted at the last second, the blade skimming inches from his throat, the heat of its edge singing the fabric of his jacket. Korth didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, relentless. Falcon barely managed to bring the shaft of the lance up in time. Metal clashed against alien alloy sparks. Flying, the sheer force of the impact sent a shock up Falcon's arms, nearly making him lose his grip. He rolled, breaking away, breathing hard. Kath's yellow eyes burned with something primal, but beneath the fury there was something else. Doubt. The battlefield had shifted. His warriors, his invincible core, were breaking. He came to conquer, to burn this colony to the ground. Now he was the one. Struggling, how Korth snarled, dismissing the thought. He charged again, blade flashing in a deadly blur. Falcon didn't retreat. He met him head on. Above them, the battle raged. The last Kyle Vor warships were in full retreat, their formations breaking apart as Stra's drones and the remaining human ships pressed the attack. In the cockpit of the Icarus, Corey Howard locked onto a fleeing Keylor fighter, his targeting system flashing red. Not today, he muttered. He squeezed the trigger. A burst of plasma fire streaked across the sky, tearing through the enemy vessel. The fighter erupted in a ball of flames, spiraling downward before vanishing in the chaos below. Shooter, Kim called from the co-pilot seat. That's another one down. Storan's got the rest on the run. Howard barely nodded, his focus shifting back to the battlefield below. Where the hell is Falcon's lungs burned, his body screamed in protest, but he didn't let up. Came at him with another savage overhead strike, but this time Falcon anticipated it. He twisted his stance, stepping into the attack rather than away from it. His shoulder slammed into Kath's chest, knocking him off balance. With a grunt of effort, Falcon drove the butt of the lance into Kath's ribs. The warlord staggered back, his breath coming in sharp, pained bursts. His blade dipped slightly, his grip tightening, as if realization had just struck him harder than any weapon could. Falcon saw it for the first time. Kath's certainty wavered. His entire life had been built on the belief that the Kyle Vor were untouchable, unbeatable, yet here he was bleeding, struggling. Watching his fleet collapse, Kath's chest rose and fell heavily, his breath ragged, his mind screaming against the reality he refused to accept. Falcon gritted his teeth. You feel it, don't you? Kath's eyes snapped up, blazing with fury. You're not God's. Falcon spat. You never were. Korth roared with one final desperate burst of strength. He charged. Falcon sidestepped at the last second, spinning the lance in a tight AR. The sharpened edge slammed into Kath's chest, piercing between the gaps in his armor. The warlord gasped, his body jerking. His blade slipped from his grip, falling uselessly into the dirt. For a moment neither of them moved, then Korth collapsed. He groaned, his breath ragged. Blood dripped from the wound dark against his scorched armor. His fingers twitched, clawing weakly at the dirt. He tried to push himself up, but his body refused. Above them, the last KLV ships disengaged, retreating into orbit. Ventura appeared beside Falcon, panting. Is he dead? Falcon stared down at Kath's motionless form, watching as the once mighty warlord struggled to draw breath. This was the moment, the final blow. A clean shot would end him, but as Falcon looked at something clicked. Killing him wasn't the victory, wasn't just a warlord. He was a symbol, a force of terror meant to grind them into the dirt. The four followed him because they believed him to be unstoppable, untouchable, and now here he was on his knees, broken, bleeding. A failure. Killing him would make him a martyr. Letting him crawl away meant every Kyle would remember this moment, their warlord beaten and broken. Falcon exhaled sharply. No, he said finally, but he's finished. A distant whine cut through the chaos. Falcon turned, spotting a core shuttle descending through the smoke, engines sputtering from damage stained in the battle. Korth shifted, his fingers clenched into fists. Even now, even after everything, he refused to surrender. Two core soldiers sprinted from the wreckage, dragging their wounded leader toward the waiting shuttle. Ventura raised his rifle, weakened. Still, Falcon grabbed his arm. Let him go. Ventura stared at him. You're serious? Falcon nodded, watching the shuttle lift off its hull, barely holding together. The warlord had lost. That was enough. Seconds later, a streak of FTL light marked its departure. Korth was gone for now. Falcon turned back toward the surviving colonists. They were battered, blooded, but standing get the wounded to the Icarus. He ordered, "We're getting out of here." Ventura nodded, already moving to gather the survivors as Falcon watched them move. A deep, exhausted breath escaped him. It wasn't over, not yet, was still out there, and the Kalor wouldn't forget what had happened today. Neither would humanity. Falcon narrowed his eyes at the burning remains of the battlefield. Today was a battle. The war was still waiting. Hey there, Space Hum. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind, or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing, every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.